Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Critical Moves. Today, I am your host, Jack, and I am joined by two of the most handsome strategy players I've ever seen in my life. We are here today, the three of us, to change the world's perspectives of the Victoria 3 player base. We are the audience. So, I'm joined today by Tim
Hey everyone, how you doing?
and Joe.
Hey everybody, glad to be here. Game I know a lot about, but no recent things.
Yeah, so Victoria 3 has had, from my perspective, it's had a pretty eventful last year or two, especially with DLCs. I mean, it's been ongoing as a Paradox game, obviously. It's had a number of DLCs come out every year with the seasons or like seasonal content. Tim, I think you've been kind of along with the ride the longest, maybe between all three of us, or at least with your ears close to the railroad tracks.
Yeah, I played since the very beginning, since it came out, and I saw the great potential for it. Even though when it came out, it was really rough. Let's be real. When it came out, you could not finish a game because it would crash massively before the end. Though I believed in it and I stuck with it, and there's been some major improvements with the DLCs coming along the way, and now it sits in a really good place. I would argue it's Paradox's best game right now.
Wow, I could see that. I think most people would argue Victoria 3 or Stellaris, right? Al's not here, so we can say it as much as we want. Uh, but I really enjoyed it from the start also. I haven't played it in a year, I just discovered. I never even played Charter of Commerce. They're big, like that was the first of the we've now fixed everything DLCs,
Yeah.
right? But I liked it before they did that, you know? I got a lot out of that game. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so to update you, Joe, what Charters of Commerce did, and anyone that played maybe before the DLC came out, and the big difference is that instead of trying to make individual trade deals for every single deficit that you have or surplus of any good, there is now the concept of the world market. And so your nation will naturally trade with the world market if its goods are really expensive or really cheap, either way, to get more or sell a surplus of that. So there's this big automation that happens to kind of equalize your goods. That doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything with it. It doesn't mean that now it's just you forget about all of that. You can still heavily guide it. You can still put tariffs or subventions. You can still build specific trade centers to have more trade, or you can still make individual trade deals with individual countries or embargo certain countries. You can still influence all of that. You just don't have to micromanage it anymore. And that's the big thing. And thus, you can say, oh, we're not going to be producing too much of this one good. And still, the world market will sell you that good. So you can kind of specialize more as a country, which I think is fantastic.
That's really interesting that they did that. I know, and you guys are telling me stuff that I should have heard about a long time ago, so hopefully the listeners aren't like, "Come on, let's get going." But I used to really enjoy the micromanaging part. Like one of the things people would always say is just get yourself in the French or the British or the Russian trade market, and then you can just build furniture and you're good and you go to the moon. And I would always, my thought was always like, no, 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 I want to have a balanced market myself. And then whenever I joined France or Great Britain's market, I'd be like, they messed everything up for me. Now my market is, now I have no onus with anything I do. No matter how many lumber mills I make, we're never going to have enough lumber now. But that's interesting, the world market deal. And I like that they kept that you can still micro some of it, right? Like you can still get into some of that, right? I like that.
I mean, you can still massively have like tariffs and be a protectionist nation so that other goods that are being sold on your market are way more expensive. So you can still try to be entirely self-sufficient if that's what you want. Yeah, there's just different ways of playing that you can engage in. Which and then when you do try to micro it, your micro becomes more effective. So
Yeah,
your actions have more power.
that makes sense. Because there was a point before where you could only do so much. You know, if you were short on something, there's only so much you could get. So,
Okay, Jack, should we talk a little bit about what Victoria is for those at home that haven't played the game?
Yeah, let's consider just for a moment while we're still early before somebody clicks off the episode. Maybe they've heard of Victoria, maybe they see it on Steam pages, maybe they are aware of it as a Paradox title. But Tim, as somebody with the most experience, probably, what would you describe Victoria 3 as, especially now that some of the updates have kind of consolidated the mechanics of the game?
I would say it is a economic simulator, a political simulator of the 1800s and a little bit after, so the Industrial Revolution and Victorian era in general. And it puts you as leadership of a nation that sees the transformation of power going from the landowners and from the clergy and from the monarchies away towards the newfound powers of industrialization, of bureaucracy, of intelligentsia, and having to manage that transfer and l- letting you have your own flavor of all that.
I'm glad you said it that way because based on who you pick, it really will affect how much of that transition you have to engage in. You know, if you pick someone like the United States, you know, what they're going to do next is very different from someone like Vietnam, or as the game would call them,
Yeah,
Dinam. You know,
yeah.
in a place like Dinam, you're still trying to wrestle control of your government from the king, from the monarchy. So, like half the game, if you play a country like that, will be just trying to get control so you can industrialize. It's quite interesting, the political part.
What I appreciate so much about the game is that it puts you in a position where you make decisions similar to the decisions that people of that time were making. Maybe you read in a history book of like, oh yeah, and this year they put through a law that means that now this, and it doesn't really sink in that much. But when you're in front of that decision to maybe introduce this law or not, and you see the consequences, you see the downsides and the upsides, and more importantly, you're being given power by different interest groups that each have their own agenda, that each have their own ideologies, that each have their amount of power and how that power manifests itself. And then you have to make decisions that impacts them. You now understand why certain deals were made or why certain laws were passed or and to me that's a better history lesson than any textbook I can think of.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think of some of the major decisions that countries have made, oh, why didn't they abolish slavery earlier? You know, why did it last so long? And if you've played this game, how many players have been like, I want to do this so bad, but as soon as I click it, my landowners and 80% of my military are going to rebel, and it's basically game over then, you know? I
Yeah.
have to bide my time and build to this. It's pretty interesting, actually, how that works out in the game.
Yeah, and it gets really fascinating because if you go down to the more granular level of like, okay, why are they rebelling and so on? Well, there's actual reasons for it. The game simulates the employment, it simulates the production buildings, it simulates the cultural aspects of these individuals, which I think is fantastically well done.
Yeah, and you can see how, okay, you can't, let's just keep using slavery. You can't make the switch, but there are some moves you can make that the landowners don't mind as much that can build towards that take away some of their voting power, take away some of their other things, and you could see how that has a knock-on effect to start
Mhm.
changing your society. It's really cool how it does that. Now, I know people might say it's limited, but I've always thought it was quite interesting. Some people don't like the waiting game you have to play, but I've never minded.
I liked one of the latest DLC allowed you. That's something that the DLCs have done well is before you try to pass a law and then you click, oh, I passed this law. Okay. And then you try and wait and there's not much interaction. But now you can negotiate some concessions. So
Hmm.
you can try to pass a law, and then while that law is being uh, attempted to be passed, you can go to the different interest groups and say, "Hey, you're neutral about this. How about you support this and we give you a concession?" Or you oppose it. What about you go neutral and we give you a concession? And then you have to negotiate which type of concession you give them. And that's like again a more granular control you have that I really appreciate rather than just yes or no.
That's new to me. That's a really good decision on their part to give you even more that you can jump in.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as somebody who's gotten into Victoria the latest between the three of us, that felt like a very natural part of the game that I had to interact with constantly. So I'm very surprised to hear just how recently that would have been added in. Because from my case, regardless of what nation you play, the way the system works, it is very granular, but the reason it feels so natural is because you're already interacting with the economic systems and the political systems that literally inherently deal with the different groups of people that make up your society. So the landowners, you're gonna have like your army. So the militants, the industrialists, the landowners, and then obviously like the illiterate peasants of your empire, right? So the consideration was every time you pass a law and you're looking at the laws screen of your politics page, and they show you kind of like I can describe them as like policies in Stellaris. When you change them, they give you a list of the benefits and withdrawals that your empire will have or your nation will have by choosing those laws, and they tell you who supports them. So the moment you go to pass a law that you see that there's enough support for, and you deal with the concessions are anything from I think some examples were things like having to the militants would or like the militaristic parts of society would like the army, I should say. They were fine with you passing a law and would support it if you guaranteed that within the next 5 years you were also going to pass a law that they favored. So
Hmm.
it would directly affect the pattern of which laws you were going to choose and also effectively affect your economy for the economic decisions you have for how many weeks were left for like construction sectors or something. So in the same case, right, like moving from uh, no school to no standardization of school to something like religious schools or private schools or public schools and the way they were supported by different like parts of society, the concessions were things like, okay, the industrialists they really want public schools, but the landowners don't want public schools. They would rather have private schools or something. But the concession is you can literally press a button that's a part of the concessions where you're investing your nation's GDP into the landowners. So you're going to take a negative of like 1,200, like negative 1,200 for the next 6 or so months as a deficit, and then they will approve the law by however many points, right? And so not only that, but there's also stalling instances, and it has like its own set of like dynamic trees that pop up of different windows and events that occur because of who passes the law or who supports the law and everything.
Yeah, and I think that's a great DLC add-on as well. I think it's so easy when DLCs are, oh, we're going to add a whole new screen, and now you need to think of this complex new little thing that you have to constantly monitor and so on, and then it becomes very bloated, and then it gets really difficult for new players to get into the game. They can be nice for veteran players because, like, oh yeah, some added complexity. Now we can do more stuff, but they already know all of the rest of the game, so then it gets so bloated that for a new player it becomes really difficult to get into. But this, I agree with you that it's a great add-on because You're already in the political screen. You're already there, and it's just an option of, oh, do you want to do something more? Here you go. And I appreciate that, and it adds some, like you said, granular control over that. So I appreciate it. Now, who would you say Victoria Tree is for?
I mean, personally, with as little experience as I have, the turnoff I had with the game was how granular and in depth the economics part of it was. Because, like you were describing before, the thing about Victoria 3 is that similarly to Crusader Kings, it's a snapshot of history, right? So everybody starting the game is going to be starting no matter what nation you choose, where that nation was at that point in time. It has the considerations, the economy for that nation has been simulated to consider the political environment that you're entering now as like the spirit of that nation. And you're also entering it with the historical events that will occur over the next period of time already lined up for your nation. So those things are almost always going to happen so long as Paradox has chosen for those events to happen most of the time. Some of them can be obviously affected, like for instance, whenever you start the game, Canada will likely get the rest of Canada over time from the UK, but that's not to say that somebody playing the US that was very good at the game couldn't actually grab those states from Canada before they become like integrated states. So, anyways, I would say that the person that Victoria appeals to now, I think, is more of somebody who wants to play the political spirit of the nation because obviously the economics are still there and it's a simulation for the economics. But what makes it appeal to me now more than it did before was the addition of the laws, which I did not realize was something separate from the base game, but also like playing it finally and getting myself invested in it, moving beyond the economic simulation that most people played it for. I like passing laws. I like interacting with the areas of society. So, like I mentioned before, the landowners, the farmers, things like that. So, I liked interacting with them across. I should say, to put all my points concisely, I liked interacting with the different areas of government across laws, across policies, across district-based or state-based doctrines, and also the interpolitical considerations of other nations on the board.
Would you say as a new player that the learning curve is manageable?
Kind of. I think Victoria 3's learning curve is very manageable for someone who's already knowledgeable of the general concepts of like politics or knowledgeable of the history of like the Victorian era, early 1800s, early 19th century kind of thing.
Do we agree that it's probably the most daunting, hardest Paradox game to get into? Or,
Hmm, I would say Hearts of Iron still beats that.
okay, you think so? I've never played Hearts of Iron, so
Yeah, especially because Hearts of Iron, it's entirely conflict based, and uh, if you don't do well in Hearts of Iron, you just immediately get like you lose the war and you die and game over and you have to stop. Victoria Tree, you don't do well and you're kind of like you just don't grow economically so much and you don't pass many laws.
yeah, you can chug along for a while. I feel like Victoria 3 really, for me, really speaks to the person that likes to play what if. That's always how I like to play it. What if Haiti didn't try to pay back France? What if Sokoto managed to fight off a lot of the European colonizers? And I like to play it that way. So, but the economic system is pretty daunting. So I think you have to be really ready to get into the weeds. And you almost have to look for a certain type of player that doesn't mind watching a YouTube video, watching the odd YouTube video that explains how to play. Because I couldn't imagine just jumping in, having never played any of the Victoria games, and trying to manage the economy. They would just, I would imagine feel completely lost. So I played Victoria 2 before Victoria 3, and I sort of felt like that game was even more obtuse than Victoria 3 is. So
I think, just like what I was saying too, I think it would appeal if you. I think most people, like young people in general, should encourage themselves to learn about history as much as they can. You know, they should learn about the history of the nations that they live in and of the world. And I think for the 1800s, the Victorian era not being that long ago, and for so many events that are so highly talked about, like both of the world wars, things like that, we're talking about an era that began before this point and set the stage for those things. I mean, when you consider that, even if you're not aware of the events that are going to occur in your Victoria session, it may not encourage you to go back and learn about them, you know, but if you were somebody that was trying to get into that and then you got to watch a documentary on Japan for the 100 years leading up to World War One and World War Two, and then you got to play Victoria 3, not only would it be like just this excellent opportunity to play through a scenario of what you just learned about in that documentary, but it would have to be interesting, right? Because as somebody who encourages myself to learn about those things, I will look at certain topics and then maybe I'll play them in Victoria. And then if I know nothing about the origination of Canada and the way that was handled by the United Kingdom, then I play that scenario in Victoria 3, I might be inclined to go back and watch a documentary. So it's kind of a side note, but I feel like it appeals in the same way you're describing. Like, by contrast, in Crusader Kings, you probably wouldn't play as some random person in Crusader Kings and then be like, I'm gonna find a documentary about this the one duke in Ireland, right? Like, it might not exist. You could play as anybody in Crusader Kings, and it's more about like the court drama, you know?
yeah, it's what you do after you start with them.
Yeah, and actually, Victoria Tree also covers the rise of fascism and communism too. And I think it does a great job of showing where that comes from and why it rose so much, and the different factions associated with it, and the interests associated with it.
Yeah, and I think just to hop in quickly into like talking about more of the way the game works in a way, I think the example I was going to give is you both were talking about earlier the way the economic simulation works. There's not a 100% method on playing the game, right? So there is, it's kind of per nation. It depends on what speed you're supposed to industrialize, things like that. And so interestingly, right, most recently I played Japan before the DLC for Japan came out, for the most recent one for Victoria. And what's interesting about that is that Japan starts in an era of complete isolationism, except for I think Japan at that time had like an agreement with Spain, and was it Spain, or I can't remember if it was Portugal. I'm going to sound terrible here to people on YouTube, but one of those countries was one of the first to kind of continue to have negotiations or some kind of like political relationship with Japan while they were isolationist to the rest of the world. Anyways, if you play as Japan in Victoria 3, you're entering into an era where, you know, the crowned empire that follows, I believe, at the time, Shintoism in Japan, their political power is kind of being disrupted, and also the major world powers are seeing Japan for its value as a market and are forcing themselves in a way into Japan's market for it to open to the rest of the world. So when you play as that nation, you're getting put into a spot where you have to industrialize as quickly as possible because you're kind of not that much of an industrial nation, but your materials and existing economy is very strong, and you have one of the strongest navies in the world at the start of the game, right? So some people play the game as Japan, and then they break out of isolationism, and then they immediately conquer like the Eastern world, you know?
That is one of my favorite types of game. Not Japan, because Japan's too strong, but those games where they're a little bit isolated, they're a little behind, but they've got access, they have resources, they have things that they can start to manipulate. And so I like to get in there and build up that empty economy. I love it when I see I'm starting a game and my country's got one construction, one lumber mill, and nothing else. I'm like, let's get into this. Let's do it. It's my favorite.
Well, what's also really fun and an aspect you don't see much in single player, but you can either play with a couple of friends, or you can play on a Discord server where people get together for like a weekly meetup. And then you have this real diplomacy and this real balance of powers where players really keep each other in check, that nobody gets too big and dominates everyone else. And you have this like shifting alliances, which I think, again, perfectly illustrates the time where this was happening, where there was like these couple great powers in Europe that were dominating most of the world, and it all worked on like a delicate balance of alliances that ultimately culminated in World War One, as we know.
So when you do your multiplayer games, Tim, do you guys have house rules and whatnot where you can't be anyone too powerful, or do you let someone play as Britain and just sort of steamroll everyone?
We try different games. You have big public games where people come on Discord, and then almost every nation in the world is picked. I mean, other than like the really small ones, and that gets like kind of huge. It's really fun, but sometimes a little bit chaotic. But there are usually rules against like trying to game the game too much. Like trying to get unfair advantages and so on. But then when you play with a couple of friends, you can play, oh, let's all play minors, or you can be like, oh, let's all play great powers. And I think they're both fun for different reasons, but the real diplomacy lives when you all pick great powers, because there you really have to make sure nobody gets too big and people can gang up or something like that, and you have to negotiate that, and that's the most interesting part, I think.
It's so funny you say that. I could see how that could be possible, that the most fun comes from the great powers in multiplayer. But when I think to my own 500 plus hours in this game, I have never once played as France or Great Britain, just because. But I only do single player, so.
Yeah, and single player, um, if you get good at the game, you can really like
Hmm.
get your economy in a rocket acceleration where you just dominate everything quite easily. But that's if you play well, and so that's where the interest can be lost a little bit because you get too powerful.
I think in general, though, the learning curve and the difficulty of the economics simulator in Victoria is just similarly set up to other Paradox games, right? Because I'm going to keep making the comparison, but like one of the major problems that people run into in Stellaris, right, is that they are given options that they do not need to take. So in Stellaris, they have strategic resources like exotic gas. If your empire comes across them, you get a big pop-up on your screen. It's like, oh, amazing, your empire has discovered this strategic resource. You can use it to improve technologies in certain ways. Then in your tech tree, you get certain technologies that use this exotic resource. And then whenever you go to build buildings on planets, you see buildings that are way more powerful. And then in the corner, they say they use this tiny little exotic resource. And then you build a bunch of them, and then you are at a deficit of exotic resources. And then your economy is tanking. And then you're like, why? And it's because now your exotic resources are spent, which means none of the buildings you just spent money on are now generating money. So not only did you lose money in building them, but they're not making any. And then you've tanked your economy because as a player, you did not consider the fact that you have a limited amount of the strategic resource you're generating every month, and you're spending more than you're making on these buildings to the point where now you've replaced all your good buildings with buildings that has nobody, right? Victoria adds in Stellaris has mechanics for employment, especially now. I think they've redone them quite a bit recently. Victoria has kind of surface level at front mechanics for like employment, but Victoria also kind of immediately gives you building screens with options you don't need to take. I mean, when you're playing a country, most of the time, your country, especially at the beginning and on your tech tree with where you are, you just need to be building raw materials buildings and additional construction sectors. And then as a new player, you kind of have to learn that along the way, you should pick and choose. You should throw in a few government administration buildings every once in a while, and obviously it can depend on the nation, but you're probably not going to be leaning into these industrialized, specific resource buildings. You may not even be building iron mines for like an hour or two of the game. You may only be building like forestry buildings. And in the past, right, and I don't know how true this is now, But you would see on Reddit recommendations from a few years ago where people are like, if you want to learn how to play this game, just open up this page called the market, look for the most expensive resource, and then only build that building and build construction sectors or, or whatnot along the way as needed, or government administration as needed. And like now, I'm sure it's a little bit more nuanced, but it's still kind of the same situation where most countries are like, you can play a country and just be doing raw materials for a significant part of the game. uh, the learning curve isn't having too many options like mini Paradox games for new players to understand what to choose.
But there are quite a lot of traps, actually. There are quite a lot. Like, you can kill your economy by
Oh yeah.
switching a PM that needs a bunch of tools that you don't have, or iron you don't have, or steel you don't have, or building too many railroads. There's tons of traps in there. I get what you're saying, Jack, but I think that's one of the best parts is you're like, you click that button, you're like, oh no, oh, pull it all back. I take it all back.
The world market has ameliorated that, since that if you need a lot of iron, you can take it from the market. Except, of course, if you're the first one to switch over to steel and nobody's producing steel, the world market is not going to help you. So there are caveats there. Now, something that I find interesting is like there's something special about your first playthrough of Victoria 3, because the rulers at the time did not get a second playthrough. The rulers at the time, they learned the game of their politics that they were playing, and they made these massive mistakes like, oh yeah, we're gonna switch production to this, like, no worries guys, and then like, oh shit, that really gave us problem in our economy in the long run. So I think there's something sacred about your first playthrough, because that's your most honest playthrough. And then after you learn all these mistakes, and your next playthroughs, you can min max, you can ameliorate, you can know, oh yeah, last time when I
Yeah.
did this, and then you can like go to absurd heights and the economy, but they're all from like lived experience, which is not as honest anymore. So I find that interesting, and that you bring that up about
Yeah.
this learning mechanic.
That's interesting, the point you brought up, Tim, where you're like, the first game is sacred because in that first game, you're like, I'm gonna build a liberal utopia. We're gonna have all the welfares. We're gonna abolish slavery, and then like you end up with a large part of your population that doesn't work anymore because the welfare is good enough that they don't have to. It's pretty. I always thought that was pretty interesting. How I don't know. I haven't played the game in a year, but many people would say you actually don't want to push up some of those options too high because it will tank your economy. It's pretty interesting how that works out.
So the lesson that I would take from Victoria is especially in terms of social, political, and cultural elements, is slow and steady.
Mm-hmm.
Not the big thing immediately, not the huge changes. Is like trying to, yeah, do it piecemeal and over a longer period of time, which guarantees a form of stability actually. And I remember going into the game and having the same thoughts. Oh, I want to change everything. I want to make everything good and great and all of this. And then I learned that there is something great about stability, especially if you play like multiplayer games, and then you know that someone else could declare war upon you at any time. And then you're like, if I'm trying to go too fast, maybe I have too much of a deficit, and then if war comes, I'm not prepared for it, because then you need some deficit spending, and then things can spiral out of control. So stability becomes actually something that you look for.
That's actually a great point you brought up about war. I feel like Victoria 3 is one of the best Paradox games, at least, as showing you how expensive war really is.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Because I don't know, Stellaris, Crusader Kings, whatever. How expensive are battle or is war really? I mean,
Mm-mm-mm.
you're rich enough usually, but in Victoria 3, all of a sudden you have to supply your troops with weapons and munitions, and you maybe had just enough to not go broke before, and now you're going broke. And you have a real limit to how long you can fight these wars. And I've never felt that in any other Paradox game. That, okay, this is getting serious. I need to wrap this up. I need to do something because my economy is tanking from the cost of this battle.
Yeah, and sometimes you're fighting war over like this small territory and you've lost like this huge amount of money. You're like, wait, why the fuck am I going to war here? This is terrible. And not only that, I love also you at some point you get into the mid game and your economic expansion is limited by the workers, by the population. You don't have enough workers to fill the factories, and then you're trying to find new technological improvements for mechanization, so you need less workers for the same thing. That's great. And then you have a war, and then you need to recruit like hundreds of thousands of people, and they all die. And like, damn, my factories, how am I going to fill them now? Which is like this really like dark way of thinking about it. But this is really the kind of decision making process that goes on in your head. Like, I don't want war because I need them in the factories.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna have to let
not,
women go to work
yeah,
to fill my
yeah,
factories.
yeah, actually. And another thing that I mean, this is maybe controversial in today's age, but like this game will make you love immigration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Immigration in this game is like the greatest thing ever. People come over, they expand your economy, they go into the factories and everything like that. Like, wow.
Yeah.
If you hate immigration, play this game.
Yeah. All of a sudden you're a country with a gold rush, and some European people that aren't happy with their life are like, "Yeah, we'll come work in your gold fields and all." It's great. It's perfect for your economy, just like you said. You watch the people rush in, you're like, "This is just what I needed. Yes. Now I can go fight a war."
As someone who tried to get into the game multiple times, playing the recommended nation Belgium, I personally think that Ontario or like the Eastern Canadian state is a better tutorial area now in retrospect of having played Canada. And so like I'll quickly voice my reasons here in case somebody does want to try to get into the game. People recommend Belgium because Belgium was, as Tim will pridefully tell you as a European, that Belgium was one of the first nations to industrialize into the modern world. And so it does give a good potential for people to get their economy going and get research done early game. But I think it kind of runs into a paradox tutorial problem where paradox is like, what's a good nation that's capable but not too capable, that also gives us the freedom to just like throw a bunch of pop-ups at new players, right? So we can give them a bunch of information and they're not overwhelmed with what's going on in the actual game. That's going on like because of the simulation in the background. The thing is though is that once you kind of get into it and like let's say you're a very focused person, you're trying to learn the game and then you see all the pop-ups and you read them and you figure out how to play the game as Belgium, what will happen is the first major event that will occur is the Belgian question. And it's like you're going to have to do negotiations with Netherlands and then like what's going to happen, right? There's a chance that you like gain some space, right? I think is how that happens. It's just not very engaging. The thing about Canada is you get to Canada, everybody's illiterate. Nobody knows why they're in Canada. And the first thing you can do is you're like, okay, I have no idea how to play this game, but there are some glaring problems, right? Like you can tell that nobody in this country knows how to read. Nobody in this country has any jobs. And this country is like a big undiscovered area of raw materials. So you just start putting illiterate people to work, cutting down trees and like going to iron mines or something. And then every like 3 or 4 years, the Queen of England just gives you a huge chunk of land with a bunch of new illiterate population. So every time you start to get your shit together as Canada, the Queen of England's like, "Hey, can you manage this other state of Canada that we were kind of holding on to?" And then you're like, "Now I have Nova Scotia, and all of them are illiterate too, but they have a port, you know?" And then they give you like all of these other states, and then eventually you're the entirety of Canada almost. And you also have like the state of Washington and Oregon. Um, and so, and also like, if Alaska's right there, Alaska's probably going to negotiate with you eventually for like some Canadian land. So it feels like a good tutorial area because you're just dealing in raw materials. And then every few years, you're being given a huge space. Like larger than Belgium as a tutorial nation to now manage and then like organically grow and grow your government administration. So it gives you a few years or like an hour or so in game every once in a while before you get another state or two states, and then you're like, okay, let me start to move my government administration like field of power projection over there. So, I mean, I don't know. What is your experience, Tim, and what are your favorite countries to play for their pre-programmed events?
So I would definitely say if it's your first time, pick a nation, a smaller nation, nation with few provinces, because each province is its whole management. So you have to manage each province in a way. So I think that's one of the reasons why Belgium is recommended, because it's only two provinces and they have their very specific specialization each. So it's kind of easy to manage, and oh, you have your coal and iron mine province, and okay, you have your farmland and port province. Okay, I know what to do. Okay, I started liking to play a bit different nations like the Mamluks. And they don't have necessarily specific events, though the Ottomans do. But the Mamluks can be a fun way to try to play a bit differently instead of going the liberal route and trying to make um, all your people super intelligent and so on. You can go the religious route and you can try to have like a massive birth rate percentage and like leverage the game a little bit differently and play a different type of game, which I think is a fun alternative after you've played the previous types of games.
I've never played that one. I really like when Jack was talking about Canada, it reminded me of two of my favorite. They're both within the Spanish sphere of influence. I like Cuba. Cuba, I think, is a great first nation because you are in the Spain sphere of influence, so you can't mess up too bad. You can build almost anything and it'll be okay because you'll be able to get resources from Spain, right? You can still build up your people, get them jobs, help them become more literate, build up your education system. And then eventually you can convince some higher power to help you break away from Spain. And there's some nice intro to the military part of the game. And the Philippines is similar too. The Philippines is my other pick. They're almost like you've done Cuba, you liked it, but you want a shot to become really powerful, then you do Philippines because the Philippines can take Spanish and Europeans. If you build it up strong enough, that can integrate into your society really well. So those are mine. As far as Tim was saying, people that have a lot of scripted things, I think is it Bolivia? Who is it that gets part of Peru? I think it's Bolivia. It's
It's one of those,
scripted that
yeah,
you
yeah,
can get into a marriage with Peru
yeah.
and you can get pretty powerful and then you become the other big stick in South America with Brazil. And there's some nice tension there trying to because Brazil is pretty powerful in the game. So there's some nice tension there managing building up yourself while also not having Brazil decide to stomp you because you're getting too powerful. So
Uh,
those are some of my
the
options.
The East India Company also has a lot
Yeah.
of events for it, and you're in this weird struggle of like trying to know what you are as India basically, and then you have different pathways you can go, trying to be independent,
Yeah.
try to be more British, or yeah.
Yeah, you're secretly the third most powerful nation really if you do it right you can really be powerful and really cripple Britain too.
And I think if we go ahead and look forward at the rest of the year in Victoria, right? So at the time of filming this, the Great Wave has just come out, which is the new Japan focused like expansion of kind of the things I was describing before. I mean, I really missed out playing Japan right now. I'm gonna have to
I
restart because
know.
like it felt like normal Victoria, like there was a bunch of flavor. They didn't go too far into it, but the simulation was like, hey, you're at the end of the Edo period, like the shogunate,
Mhm.
like the political power of the nation's kind of dropping, and like there's going to be a civil war potentially, or like they're going to try to usurp you, and also these great powers are going to want to open up your market. And then this DLC comes out like within the week, and I knew about it, but I just decided to play Japan anyways. But they're like, by the way, everything you just said is dialed up to 11 with like a bunch of new flavor text and pop-ups and ways to deal with it. I mean, you know how I handled that civil war? I just demoted my general that wanted me off the. I kicked him out of the army. I laid him off, and I don't know where he went, but that ended the revolutionary strife. So now I'm probably gonna have to deal with a whole bunch of stuff. But looking forward, there's the next DLC coming up, which is like a big flavor pack for Russia, right? And I think there's going to be a bunch of stuff going on with the internal political strife following like everything that Russia had going on up to that point. And there's also going to probably be an expansion of, I think I've heard there's an expansion or a hope for expansions of some political systems. And later on, in Q1 of 2027, we're getting the last little bit of this Volume 3 of Victoria 3 DLCs until Volume 4 starts up. And the last DLC for Volume 3 is going to be a bunch, like a big flavor pack for China, right? So both of those nations are going to get a new, fresh coat of flavor text and pop-ups and narrative events and mechanics involving industrializing and entering into the 19th century and being on the world stage. So it's going to be pretty interesting. I don't know if either of you two are interested in what those DLCs are offering mechanically or the nations that they're covering, but I mean, they're both pretty significant powers in today's world.
Yeah, so I'm all for scripted events. I'm all for flavor, nation-specific flavor. I think when it's done right, it's a lot of fun. Of course, it can't be too railroady. It can't be too much like, oh, anytime you play this nation, this is exactly how this goes. I think France was done quite well with this because in France, when you start, you have different political factions. Remember, this is France right after the Napoleonic Wars. So it's a place where a lot of different ideas are living at the same time. And there's a lot of political turmoil at the start of the game in France. And so playing France is kind of unique in that way because you have to manage this political turmoil more than other countries. And so it's actually an interesting nation to play as because of that. But you get to choose a bit which direction you go in, and it's not smooth sailing whichever direction you go in. And then there can be like, you have the Paris Commune that pops up, or different. You can go back in a Bonapartist movement. It's really interesting. I played, for example, Russia, and there you have like some interactions with the Tatars and with the Circassian movement and so on, and that is not so interesting. It's not very back and forth, and it doesn't do too much. And it becomes more of a nuisance rather than anything else. And it doesn't give too much flavor as to which your country as a whole is going towards. So I would be up for something if it's done well. If it's not done well, I'd rather not have it. Same with China. China is a very unique country to play. With its huge population, it can become a huge powerhouse, but I, it does need to make sure it's punished for it as well, because especially in multiplayer, it can get abused really easily if you know the mechanics a bit too well. You know how to take advantage of that. I would like to see China that gets really difficult to play and has difficulties with how its nature or its very nature.
And I know because Joe said that he hasn't really played in the past year, I wanted to ask you, Tim, have you played any of the Iberian Twilight expansion that they came out with that's like Portugal and Spain expanded?
No, no. Now Spain starts in a civil war, uh, which is, a showcase of just how poorly Spain was doing at this time, and why it stayed in away from great power status for the remainder of history. But no, I didn't. I'd be down for something like Portugal to play like a trading empire. I think that's what the latest DLCs have done. Is it made a lot of fun to not be a blob and conquer the whole world, but be a trading empire and focus on something specific. And I think that's a lot of fun. And the latest DLC now with the waves allows sea power to be even more relevant than ever before. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and like we were saying before, I mean, Victoria's like a great opportunity to jump into a snapshot of that stuff. The way it makes you play, depending on every nation, is so, I don't know, it's just cool. It's one of those things where
Yeah.
like when you're playing Crusader Kings, you can choose different parts of the world, and yes, there are different considerations, but like I still tackle everything the same way. And then in Victoria, depending on who you choose, you're like absolutely on board to do certain things a certain way. Like when I was describing Japan earlier, you're like not really worried about some things. Like your goal is to keep the emperor in charge. You're not with the people on getting the power out of like consolidation. You know, like you're like we need to maintain power where it's been since humans discovered Japan. So, but I would say that that's almost a full episode of Victoria 3. I think this has been a great conversation about one of the best economic and now political simulators on the market. I think if people are interested in Victoria 3 and they've played other Paradox games, war is involved, but it's not as huge a mechanic as I would say some of their other games. It's kind of closer to something like Crusader Kings. And also the politics there are at a national level, which is a little bit more expansive or a little bit more on like the world stage compared to something like Crusader Kings. It's more of like the courts and like interpolitical turmoil and diplomacy that you're doing as an actual ruler. You know, you're playing as someone with the name, and in Victoria, you are the spirit of a nation, and that's represented by every little scenario that you get into. So, um, thank you, Tim, for joining me, and thank you, Joe. It's been a great time, and I'm glad we could all get this out of the way because I know, Tim has been itching to talk about Victoria the whole time, so we've got to come back to it.
Yeah, it's been great, and indeed, I appreciate about Victoria that it's not just a world conquest game. That was a problem with previous Paradox games, and I think they solved it with this one. You don't want to conquer the world; you just want to make your own country a lovely country, or maybe a terrible country if that's what you're into. And they nailed it. And it's not perfect. The war system, it's not a war-focused game, so it's not that there's some glitches sometimes, but it's very polished all in all. So it's a great time to jump into it.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good entryway into not only learning about the terminologies for the politics, but also just understanding economics at a macro level that kind of trickles down, unintended, to be like a micro level understanding. Because there are certain things where even in real life, day to day, you're like, if you just cut out this deficit in your budget, the same way you would as a nation in Victoria, you'll actually make money. But yeah, that's Victoria. I think it's like a really good. Not so. I used to never say Victoria was all encompassing. I used to just consider it an economic simulation, but now I think it's a pretty hearty consideration of multiple mechanics, and it's got a lot of appeal to it. So, thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of Critical Moves. This has been our Victoria 3 episode, probably our first full episode of Victoria 3. Is that right, Tim? And so, if this is your first Critical Moves episode and you found us somewhere, we're usually everywhere. We're on YouTube. We have our own website, criticalmovespodcast.com. We have a forum there, so if you have questions, if you want to chat with us, we have a community Discord, we have community tabs on our YouTube, and you can find us on basically probably every streaming platform that also has podcasts on it. So there's comment sections there. Come tell us what you think. If you're a fan of Victoria and we got some stuff wrong, or you just want to chat about it further with Tim, who's kind of an expert compared to me, you can come into our community Discord where it's easiest to find us. And so that's criticalmovespodcast.com, YouTube, streaming platforms, our forum online. You can sign up with the Hotmail if you still have one of those. And that's been our episode. So thank you guys for joining me for Victoria 3, and we'll see you next time.